Welcome to Travel Again Presents, the weekly travel roundup covering the headwinds and tailwinds impacting the business of travel. Please welcome our hosts, Mike McCormick and Ed Silver. Hello, Mike. Welcome back. It's nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
Mike, last we were together, we were in Dallas for a road show hosted by Southwest Airlines. For our guests, you can see our interview with Rob Brown online. And thanks again to that great group that showed up in person. It was nice to be together in person for a podcast, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was good. Good fun.
All right, Mike, this is episode 6 of our podcast. I cannot believe it. We are really getting up there in count now.
Yep, it's coming along great.
All right. So, Mike, today we have a special edition of the podcast. We have 2 guests, both with different perspective on the news this week. And speaking of news, we are only going to cover one story this week. And it was indeed a crazy week last week. So let's get into it. Any thoughts, Mike, before I go forth?
Well, just like, look, this is a story that's been years in the making. I mean, we've been covering it. Obviously, the industry has been paying close attention to all these issues, but this is not something that's just about what happened last week. It's a whole bunch of things that have culminated in this like one event, meaning, you know, a major leadership change and a major reversal of Americans' approach in the market. But, you know, again, a lot that's gone into getting us there. And it's really, in some ways, much has changed, but not really that much at all, because the story still remains the same. The challenges and the opportunities are still the same. And but, you know, certainly the chairs have been moved around a bit, and we'll see where this all goes. And I'm excited about our guests today, because I think we'll get some great perspective.
Okay. So obviously today we are covering American Airlines in the news last week in a major way. And I thought, instead of showing up articles like we normally do, I thought I would give a little history of American Airlines NDC strategy over time. And so what I did, as I often do, is I went to 4 or 5 of my favorite new AI chatbots, and I asked the chatbot, can you give me a history of American Airlines NDC strategy over time? And so one of them, the advanced Gemini version from Google, came back with what I think is actually the best answer. And it broke it down into phases, Mike. The first phase is what it calls early adoption. Approximately 2015 to 2022, 2023, American Airlines was one of the early adopters of NDC, recognizing its potential to offer a more personalized and dynamic way to sell airline products beyond the traditional global distribution systems and GDSs. During this phase, they focused on developing their NDC capabilities and forging partnerships with technology providers and travel agencies. Then you move ahead to the next phase, which is the aggressive push phase. And that's 2023 approximately, all the way up to, I don't know, let's call it last week. American Airlines significantly accelerated its NDC strategy, aiming to shift a substantial portion of its bookings to NDC channels. They introduced incentives and sticks for agencies to adopt NDC, such as additional content and functionality not available in the GDSs. However, this push also involved removing some fare content from the GDSs, which caused friction with travel agencies and corporate travel managers who rely on the GDS for their booking process. Not noted by the AI, but important to note, there was also a full gutting of the entire corporate sales and support teams, in particular around corporate agencies. I think that's important context.
I think they should have named this the shock and awe phase, actually. But that's for, well, keep going. Yeah, I think this is good. The other thing I wanted to say too on the early adoption phase, it was early adoption for 8 years. That tells you something about the speed at which it was being adopted. But you know, we'll come back to that too. Keep going.
The funny thing is that they have a course correction phase, which they labeled as 2024 to present, which essentially is last week and this week. American Airlines experienced some setbacks with its aggressive NDC push, including a softer than expected revenue environment and pushback from travel partners. Last week, they announced a course correction, acknowledging the need for a more balanced approach. They committed to working more collaboratively with travel agencies and GDSs while still promoting NDC as a key part of their distribution strategy. Not mentioned in the AI response was also a removal of certain staff members who were involved in the architecting of that more aggressive strategy. And as part of their course correction, several members were removed. That takes us up to the current strategy, which is essentially this week. American Airlines continues to invest in NDC capabilities, recognizing its potential to enhance the customer experience and offer more tailored products and services. They're working to make NDC more accessible and user friendly for agencies, while also ensuring that their content is available through multiple channels to meet the needs of different customer segments. Mike?
Well, so a few things. One is that I think it was just one member that got removed, by the way, just for accuracy, but and very in a very high profile way. But I keep coming back to the same thing. We talked about it a bit when we were in Dallas with the group there, and I've been saying it a lot. Is that it comes down to two numbers, and you say, well, the two numbers is like 211 and, well, at the time I was saying about 9.2. And you're like, well, what's the significance of those two numbers? And the first number is that American last year employed 211 million passengers, the most of any airline. Delta was 200 million, Southwest is about 172, United 165. So that gives you a sense of that. Then you look at the market cap of each airline, which is basically the value of them in the market today. And Delta was at 33.7, about 34 billion. United 17 billion. Southwest 16.7, around 17 billion too. So it gives you a sense. And American was at 9.2. So it gives you a sense of, like, although they employed the most passengers, their market cap was, significantly less, half or a third of or even a fourth almost of its primary competitors. And you say, why did they go on a very aggressive course? It's because their shareholders were basically driving them to do that, in a sense, because they were significantly valued less in the market than everyone else. It's what it comes down to. Now, what happened last week was because after they got through the first quarter, and there was clearly some dissension even on the earnings call about where the state of affairs, when they had to do their second quarter guidance, which they said they were going to miss their numbers again, and their market cap dropped to 7.6 billion. That says it all. I mean, at the end of the day, this is all great. We go through all this in the industry, and certainly it all matters. But when people ask, well, why? That's the why. And it still comes back to, these are public companies. They have shareholders, and they have shareholders who have expectations about what the stock is doing and what the value of the company is going to be. And when you take a 15% plus drop of an already deflated number, and clearly the strategy is going in the wrong direction. But the objectives we'll talk about, the opportunity is still there. The need to modernize is still there. So then now it's like we get into not only talking about a lot of what happened, but also the now what, right? And that's why, again, really excited about our two guests today. I think it's terrific they're coming on to talk about it. Kind of come into the living room and let's have a chat and see where this goes.
All right. Thank you, Mike, for that clarity. And we will be right back with our guests. So first, Mike, you're up first.
Yes. So let's talk a bit. This is about our friends at BLS.
Yes.
And, again, we talk about BLS a bunch. They're a great family company, one of the major providers of black car around the country, work in the corporate as well as leisure space. But they just announced that they doubled their fleet and their whole presence in Vegas, which is no easy feat to do. Again, they're already one of the major players out there, and but continue to make big investments back in the industry. And again, just want to recognize them. They're a great supporter of what we're doing with travel. Again, have been back to when we were working on the project during the pandemic. So again, thanks to the Oakland family, they're just again great people. But they run a great company in an otherwise really difficult, challenging industry, right? Having a group that you can rely on in that, with great drivers and a great infrastructure there. They're a terrific company. So just want to do a shout out to our friends at BLS.
All right, very good. Mike, that takes us up to our first interview. Today, we will be interviewing Zane Kerby, President and CEO of ASTA, American Society of Travel Advisors. Zane has served as President and CEO of ASTA for more than 11 years after spending nearly 14 years in business development at NBTA and GBTA. He holds degrees from BYU and the University of Maryland. And for the record, Mike, Zane, and I all work together at GBTA. Please welcome to the stage, Zane Kerby.
Thank you, Ed, and thanks, Mike. Boy, full disclosure, we did work together.
Full disclosure. Nice to see you, Zane.
You too.
And had some fun. Did some great things at GBTA, and Zane was a big part of that. So, and wow, man, I can't believe it. 11 years now at ASTA, right? I mean, I'm sure you can't believe it either.
Long days, short years here at ASTA for sure.
Well, so thanks for coming on. And, first off, I think just to ground everybody in ASTA, and you can see behind you, the American Society of Travel Advisors, you represent basically the travel agency community, but give me just a little bit about, your member profile. What is your, what are your, how many members, what do you represent? And then a bit about what the key issues you've been focusing on.
Yeah, sure. So I know we're talking American Airlines today, but ASTA is again represents all facets of the third party distribution channels. So that ranges everywhere from the largest corporate agencies like JP Morgan Chase and BCD and American Amex GBT to there's a huge long tail of people who still sell travel from their home. A lot of the sort of brick and mortar agencies, some are still around, but many of them have gone home. But yeah, we have about 18,000 members at ASTA, and it's a very robust group. I'd say the sort of the heart of our organization is probably that small woman-owned leisure-based agency that all around the United States. So there's tens of thousands of them, and they certainly make up that what I say is the heart and soul of ASTA. But what we're talking about today not only affected them, but a lot of our corporate agency members as well.
Yeah, so you hit it on it. I was going to come back to the kind of the long tail part of it. I mean, I think what oftentimes gets missed is that we talk about the big like OTA players, the Expedias, the Pricelines, Booking, etc., or the big agencies, the names you would hear. But the realities are there's still, I'd say probably the majority of the business still is being booked by that long tail of those small to medium agencies out there, right? I mean, that are highly, dependent upon the GDS and the systems that are tied into it. It's not as simple as just wanting to, you can maybe if you're well, certainly American, you might wish those to go away so that everybody can just, you can have a handful of players that direct connect and call it a day. But the realities are that's not how the industry works.
Yeah, you're right. And those large sort of corporate programs get a lot of the headlines, and that's who the big media players in our industry call. But the reality is that our country is still the backbone of our country is still small business. Yeah. And the large, while the big guys have some of the numbers, the largest number of people who are traveling for corporations are traveling for small companies. And so it's the 10-person law firm here in the DC area. It's a 20 or 30 person, manufacturing plant in, anywhere around the US. I mean, so there's a lot of business travel that happens at the top, but actually the majority of it happens in the middle and toward small corporations. So those people don't have the resources to hire a corporate travel manager. They rely on agencies to fill that for them so that they can focus on their core business.
Well, and traditionally for the airlines, certainly, but hotels, car rental too, that was always the most profitable part of their business anyway, right? It's like, and tend to be the most loyal, and and again, the distribution costs are let's say low to medium relative to the big corporations who bring the numbers, but also negotiate, significantly lower, pricing and deals, right? So, so you as ASTA took a bold step and you filed a lawsuit against American at one point and really took a pretty aggressive stance on behalf of your members. What led to that decision? That couldn't have been an easy one to get to.
No, not an easy decision, but it wasn't actually a lawsuit. We filed a formal complaint to them against American Airlines to the Department of Transportation. So it wasn't a lawsuit. We don't think they broke any laws, but they certainly did break several regulations that DOT is as you know, is the regulatory body over the airlines. They're the only regulatory body over the airlines. If you have any kind of complaint about anything, it has to go to the Department of Transportation. And so, last year when they removed 40% of the fares from EDIFACT, where 70%, more than 70% of all business travel in the United States is booked, and put all those low fares on AA.com, they sort of forced corporate America into a decision, right? Get a low price, a responsible price for your shareholders on AA.com, or perform duty of care for your employees in the EDIFACT channel and pay the higher price. And the vast majority of large corporations paid the higher price and continue to book through EDIFACT.
Right.
So, and the other thing is what was broken, what rule was broken. Whenever you make a substantive change like this, Mike, whenever you do that, there has to be a countervailing benefit to consumers. And we searched high and low and couldn't find any. So that's why we reported them for unfair and deceptive practices to the Department of Transportation. It's been through a series of back and forth with answers and re-answers to them. We're really glad that this sort of settled in a more sort of market-based approach that you referenced in your opening comments.
So at that point, do you basically withdraw the complaint? Is it kind of like onward now? What does that leave you, or do you kind of leave things in place, kind of pending? We'll see what happens.
Right? That wasn't the only step that we took. We actually went to the chair of the FTC, Lena Khan, because this really is about monopoly or oligopoly power, right? When deregulation happened in 1978, I was at a hearing last week with Pete Buttigieg, and he said, when it was first announced in 1978, all this deregulation of the airlines, they anticipated that in 50 years, about now, there would be 100 airlines serving the United States. It hasn't really worked out that way, right?
No.
It hasn't. And so, where from here, we hope that certainly that we can work with American Airlines towards a responsible implementation of NDC. But the way that NDC was sort of put forward by IATA in 2013 in order to gain approval of the Department of Transportation to make this change, it's developed very differently than was originally anticipated. So, I'm not sure if the promise of NDC is going to happen sooner or later, but certainly happy that Robert Isom over at American Airlines has decided that he's going to try to implement NDC with channel partners rather than around them.
Right. And so just pause on that for a minute. You made that comment. I think it's a good segue to the other kind of thing I want to talk to you about, the promise of NDC. Because the way it was presented, again, was, hey, we're creating a modern retailing experience, an opportunity to personalize. For the airlines, if it meant that they could, increase their yields because they can price, again, more granular to different markets and personalize, okay. If it meant that they had better conversion on the offers that they create, and you create, and create a better service model in terms of, agents or distributors being able to, have more control for like duty of care and for servicing. There was a lot of promise. I personally don't see any of that materializing yet in the market. The skeptics, I was one of them when NDC was first announced, was more like, hey, this is just another lever in a long line of attempts to lower distribution costs, remove the GDS from the equation. It didn't feel like any of those things were really going to, I was skeptical they were going to happen. Now we're getting maybe to a place where it could happen, but again, haven't seen any of that yet. Do you think ultimately there is a better customer experience in all this? I mean,
it's a great question, Mike. I'm not sure. As originally contemplated, NDC was going to allow the consumer to sort of gauge and compare different bundles of services from the airlines. So you would be able to compare like an economy plus seating on Delta plus 2 bags versus a first class seat on American with a lounge pass and 1 bag. right? And you'd be able to look at these side by side and compare the different services
Right.
being offered.
Right.
And you're right, the GDSs at the time couldn't account for all those different variables. And so I certainly understand the airlines, want to be able to utilize what they are, the different parts of their offer in different and presenting them in a different way. But the way that that NDC has sort of evolved, it's really now each airline is developing their own NDC. So I'm not sure how, unless an aggregator does it and is able to actually put these buckets of value up against each other in a place that can be compared, I'm not sure we're going to get the sort of the total value to the customer of NDC. I completely understand the value of the customer, the value of NDC to the airline.
Hey, Zane, just on that customer question, if the agency is the customer, do they have a better experience with NDC?
Well, we haven't thus far. I will say,
It was almost it was a step backwards. I mean, unfortunately, right?
Well, this year, when American Airlines decided, if you're not at 30% of bookings via NDC, you're not going to be able to offer points and miles to your customers. We met with the largest 30 corporate agencies in the United States and said, "Hey, where are you guys?" No one was above 5%.
Yep.
So you can talk about all this is, again, a closed door conversation, largest agencies in the United States. No one was doing this well. And they were scrambling to try, like people are some, if you read some of the headlines, you think that travel agencies are like, stuck in the past and, holding on to trying desperately to try to make this work. And it takes a lot. I mean, we had the Amex GBT gentleman come to our conference last year, and he said, we did this with one airline, with Air France, and it took Amex GBT and all their resources and Air France like 6 months to try to get it to a place of nascent technology. Right at the beginning, it just takes a lot of time and work when you're going to change the distribution model this dramatically. So it just right now it's not where it needs to be. We have obviously working with other airline partners, I think, in a much more constructive fashion thus far to try to bring this about. And again, allow the airlines to distribute their product however they see fit.
So it goes to again, the long tail of these agencies. I mean, you mentioned like an Amex GBT or, the larger players, they at least have the capability to have a development staff and have, resources and, to be able to do any of this, or actually, like you said, even just to see the beginnings of the benefit. But for the long tail of a lot of these agencies, I mean, they're, again, what's the outlook? I mean, generally, even just this issue aside, I mean, is that are we looking at, a real change in terms of the marketplace in another 3 to 5 years? I mean, can they keep up in this environment?
I think your point. So a lot of these small companies that rely on corporate agencies, they want to keep them. They want to keep that level of personalization.
Right.
But the agency is reliant on these third-party IT aggregator companies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess I'd say it depends, right? I think the level of personalization that they have, and the trust that they built with the corporate customers, particularly on the small and mid-sized scale, that I don't think is going away. I don't think tomorrow that the tools are there and developed enough for agencies to just be pushed out of this equation. Corporate customers want the services that agencies provide for no other reason that they want their people to not be focused on travel. They want their people focused on their own P&L, right? So it depends on those aggregators. If the aggregators get together, are able to figure out how to bring a market solution for mid and small size agencies, I think you'll see that's the best case outcome in the majority of our space. If they don't, then I think you will see some consolidation, or at least maybe a reorienting. Agencies that do have technology or will partner with those that don't, or will they'll offer services to those that don't.
Interesting.
I don't think they're going to go away. I think that you're going to see those that embrace technology or again have a little more advantage, or if there's a solution available to them by one of these large aggregators, GDSs, or someone else, right? You're going to see there certainly will be some shifts there.
Yeah.
Hey, Zane, does that mean that ASTA's position really is that NDC has to come through the GDSs to support that long tail?
Not necessarily. I think they sort of maybe have a head start, at least in terms of the relationships built and some of the technology there. But it's clear that they perhaps underinvested in what they were providing the airlines. Because again, if I were an airline executive sitting there saying, "Look, we have 18 different aspects of our service that we want to bundle in different ways, and you can only do 5," that's not good enough. And they jumped up and down for years and years, said it's not good enough, it's not good enough. And finally, I guess American, to your point, earlier point, Mike, just had enough. And so, but I think there's a way they could have done, they could have proceeded that didn't require creating a two-class system of their own customers, which is what Robert Isom said last week. You can't, like, if I'm a corporate customer in Dallas and I buy a $15,000 ticket from Dallas to Singapore, and I bought it through an agency that wasn't preferred, you're telling me you're not going to give me my miles and points? That just, I've seen people talk themselves into strange things, but that seemed the strangest of all.
Well, the other long tail is what the GS also does, which is connecting up, hundreds of airlines that represent, maybe a handful of tickets that you're booking each year as an agent. And, it's like, to think that like any agency, even the largest ones, want to recreate all that infrastructure on a one-to-one basis and maintain all that connectivity doesn't make any sense either.
No.
So, there's just some fundamentals about our industry that just you can't get around. Like, you can wish them away all you want, but it's not just about the largest TMC connecting to American Airlines. It's like that. Yeah, okay, you might carve that one out and have a really robust direct connection. But after you get, even for the largest agency, after you get past the first 5, 6, 7, 8, airlines, it's like, okay, I want an aggregator. I don't.
You're 100% right. And I was thinking about this whole idea of disruption, right? And if something is going to be truly disruptive, it's got to enchant either an existing or a new customer base. It's got to enchant them, or at least attract them. And looking at the moves that were made, it's hard to see who it was enchanting.
Yeah.
And it certainly didn't. It didn't enchant the people who are really important, which are American Airlines shareholders. You mentioned a couple of important numbers. I'll give you another couple important numbers. American Airlines is holding a debt load that's twice the size of any other major carrier, and their PRASM went down 5% in the first quarter this year, and that passenger for revenue seat mile, that is a really important metric. It tells you that people who book on travel agencies and who book those high-end tickets you talked about had migrated their business elsewhere. And that's what ultimately I think was the story here.
Yep, I agree. Well, so to wrap up, a couple things. I mean, one is, we've all been around the industry. This current level of chaos, where do you rank it? Do you kind of put it like low, medium, and high? I mean, it certainly feels like, very, very high, but with some perspective, where would you put it?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't it's not the pandemic, right? The pandemic where the government is shutting down borders and flights and cruise ships in the name of public health. It's nothing like that. So I'd put it in the mid-range. And I actually think that this patient is getting better, to be honest with you. I think that things are getting a little more stable here. And when you're one of your primary distribution channels, when there's an aggravated relationship there, that's not good for anybody. And so, but I think that with again, Robert Isom's announcement last week, we've certainly had some conversations since then with Scott Lawrence. I think that things should get better, and if we can work together toward serving our common customer, right? I mean, we're here to make people's make all of their corporations run more smoothly and their travel to be frictionless. And then on the leisure side, obviously, you want to make people's travel dreams magical. And if we can kind of get back to that, I think that this patient will stabilize even further.
Yeah, great. Well, and maybe that leads into the closing comment we like to ask, which is, when you look ahead in the future, we always talk about change and what's changing and all this, but what in your mind, like, what do you think won't change? What's going to stay the same?
Wow, I wish I had a crystal ball, because then I know where to invest the Kerby family fortune, which is rather modest. but I'll just say the size of an airline seat will not change without DOT interference.
Good.
The other thing I'll say to this too, and again, I'll just say, and this is not a knock on the airlines at all, but I will say I think that our regulators need to take a slightly different look at the airlines, because back to the point that we talked about earlier, if there were 100 airlines, we wouldn't have some of these problems. And there are 4 that represent more than 2/3 of all the airline, the available seat miles today. And so the behavior here is these fortress hubs and this lack of competition is really challenging. So I think until that changes too, Mike, we're going to see, perhaps more behavior like this.
Yeah, and they enjoy. I mean, look, the airlines. We say it all the time. The airlines enjoy a lot of protections. They enjoy a lot of support. We need a healthy airline industry as a country and in general. Certainly, I mean, we're all so relying on it. So it's not that. It's just that it becomes a bit of that public-private kind of partnership mentality where there has to be limits. I mean, they're not there. It's not a free market on the airline world, to your point. And it's like, so when you start crossing that line, wherever that line is, where you feel like it's kind of abuse of market power, it is concerning, right? Because we don't have choices, not many, and we rely on them to be, but we also rely on them to be safe and profitable, and to invest and reinvest in the experience. So it's a balance to walk, but it's why we all having these debates, right, and these discussions. Well, Zane, I got to tell you, and just wrap it up. I mean, I say you did a fantastic job. I think you are, in terms of representing your constituency. I give you a lot of credit for the work you did with DOT, because I think in no small part it did help bring to light the issues, and in no small part, I mean, ultimately the shareholders spoke, of course, but it did help create some clear messaging from the industry and a key segment of it about what's going on. And I give you a lot of credit for that. So hats off. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Well, I had good teachers along the way, including you.
Oh, well, thanks for that too. But again, keep up the good work.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks,
Zane. Zane Kerby is president and CEO of ASTA, the American Society of Travel Advisors. Zane, always great to see you. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
All right, Mike, real quick before we move on, I just wanted to thank Omni Hotels and Resorts for their continued support of Travel Again. We once again stayed at the Omni Los Colinas about 2 weeks ago for the Dallas Road Show, and the staff was great. The facilities were great. We hung out at the bar. There's plenty of opportunities, to mix and mingle. There's conferences going on. It's an active space. There's great places to work. And so we really enjoyed our time at the Omni, and we thank them again for their continued support of Travel Again. Mike, up next, we have our next guest. I'm going to welcome to the stage Jim Carter. Jim Carter was Managing Director of Eastern and Central Sales Divisions at American Airlines. Jim is a 40-year veteran of American Airlines. Prior to his retirement last May, Jim led American's largest division sales organization with teams in 6 of the 9 American hubs. His background was all on the commercial side of the house, with stints in revenue management, loyalty marketing, and of course, global sales. Since retiring last May, Jim enjoys time with his 2 new grandchildren, traveling with his wife, Debbie, and a very active golf schedule. Please welcome to the stage, Jim Carter.
Hey, Jim.
Hey, guys. Good to see you.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
I had no choice. You've got pictures of me playing golf, so,
Well, I was going to say, it's Tuesday. I think you only golf Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or it's raining and we dragged you in off the course one way or the other. But thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's fun to engage in this topic. Even though I don't have a dog in that race anymore, it's still fascinating to follow.
You got a lot of perspective. And I was saying to Ed, I was going to start off with kind of an easy way of going, hey, how would you define the culture and everything else? And then I was like saying to Ed, I'm like, how about we just start with, what the fuck was going on over there, man? I mean, it really has been a wild couple of years here. Just love to get your perspective about like you were living it and now just observing it, like you said. So
yeah, not only living it, but I was around the table for the early part of these discussions and
yeah,
strategy as this was beginning to come together 2 years ago.
right.
But yeah, it has been, I think you summed it up really well, actually, Mike, about those two numbers. I mean, when you are trailing your competitors in revenue production, RASM, TRASM, some of the metrics that you mentioned,
Yeah,
it's time for bold thinking. I mean, it's clear that, just matching your competitors isn't good enough, right? There's something else in the infrastructure. There's something else in the way the hubs, the network, there's something else driving and has been driving for a number of years this trailing kind of revenue performance that American just has not realized. Certainly there was a lot of merger integration work, but so was the case with Delta and United as well. So I think, again, going back to your two numbers, you start getting into making bold decisions and taking some risk. And I don't think anybody at American at the time didn't realize the amount of risk the strategy had. So it wasn't like going into this saying, first of all, it's all chips in the middle. I mean, like
yeah,
American basically, took out all their indirect selling costs to push the direct model, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
can't have like a direct to consumer strategy and then have all these indirect costs. So it was all chips in the middle. Everybody knew the risk. But I think everybody also knew at some point, if it wasn't producing the type of results, then there's going to have to be a pivot and a pivot quickly. And I think that's what you saw last week. And I was actually encouraged, frankly, by Robert's comments about lowering the temperature.
yep, yeah,
And going back to some of the principles that some of us have been around for 3 decades, about working with partners, coming up with solutions through partners, and building trust and trying to get to this end game, by working together.
Well, so I hit on the culture question though, kidding aside,
Yeah.
because I mean, being in the industry, I mean, I have a very, kind of each of the brands to me have a very palpable kind of feel to them. And American to me, and you were a big part of this. Hank was a big part of it. Allison Taylor came in when she did. She reinforced it and kind of helped you guys really to, go through another era of, bringing that to the forefront after all the mergers. But even to the early days of American, you guys were always really corporate focused. You had a clear like message in terms of what you were trying to deliver in the marketplace. You were fiercely loyal in your relationships.
Yep.
And really, and for the customer, I mean, it was, I could liken it a bit to kind of like almost like a Marriott in the sense of like, you always knew what you were going to get from American. Right. And then what I saw like happening when this all kind of happened, it was like, wow, it just was really, it felt really off brand.
Yeah.
And
So
not so much the intent, but just the way it was
Execution.
delivered.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, no question. And I think it goes back to, the culture, if you will, is a culture of high accountability, first of
Right.
all.
Right.
And so, coming out of the pandemic, when you started to question a lot of the business model that was obviously been in place for decades, and you start looking at the value of the programs, the value of having, customer relationships and programs and commissions and corporate discounts. Again, I'm not minimizing any of that work, but there was a time there to kind of evaluate what's the value of these programs. Are we getting enough in return?
Yeah.
Are we?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I mean, don't quote me exactly, but something like only 50% of our corporate contracts actually fulfilled to their contract. In terms of market share, revenue share, which American measured at the time, maybe 1.2 points above QSI, maybe 1 or 2 points above fair market share.
Right.
So you start looking at what are the actual results. Again, I'm a big relationship guy, you know that, right? And a number of us have spent our careers building these and curating these partnerships. But at the end of the day, you start looking at the results. And is there a better way? And I think, again, going back to the initial point of being a little bit behind the eight ball on performance, you start thinking more bold, right? Like, so what happens if we don't have corporate discounts? What happens if we don't have competitive commission products and things like that? And I think in the early days of this change, and this to me is really important. In the early days of all this transformation that was taking place, American was replacing corporate and agency revenue in their direct channel just fine. Again, corporate travel was just beginning to really fully recover.
Right.
And you could debate where that is today. It depends on industry, it depends on vertical, it depends on, big enterprise, small enterprise, medium enterprise, et cetera. But you start looking at, again, the value being exchanged, and American was able to recapture most of that share in revenue in their direct channel early on.
Right.
In my opinion, what's really changed is, as you saw firstly in the first quarter of this year, and as we got into the second quarter, corporate revenue, the corporate channel was booming. So what happens in the corporate channel that's so compelling? It's this last minute close in bookings, high yield, very profitable bookings.
Yep.
Guess who's not on the shelf for many of these major companies right now?
American.
American. So I think that gap became, again, my opinion, the gap became so large that even though the direct channel was churning and really producing well without the commissions, without the discounts, without all the indirect selling costs, the corporate revenue, in my opinion, just really shot up, and it really kind of chasmed that gap even greater. That now, you're updating your guidance, and you weren't keeping up with United and Delta in the beginning. Now you're falling even further behind. So.
Did things like when the JetBlue Alliance, in the Northeast got shut down, like those, like you look back, I mean, I look at like that being yet another kind of really, doesn't get talked about in this environment because all the focus is on, Vasu Raja and the departure and NDC and the correction. But like, there are things like that like really, I think hurt also really were really significant setbacks. And probably like really, I still question very much the decision on that. I feel like, I mean, that for JetBlue and for American and for competitiveness, it would have been a very good outcome had that been approved.
I agree. I mean, you're speaking to someone who was part of that integration and bringing that to life. And
you were on point for so much of that.
Yeah, and even testified for what it's worth in front of the DOJ. But that is another really good example, Mike, of kind of the bold thinking when you're behind. I mean, America needed an answer in New York.
Yeah.
And you can't get the infrastructure, you can't get the slots, you can't get the gates. There's capacity constraint. Delta was probably at the time 2 or 3 times larger, at least twice as large as American when you look at JFK and LaGuardia.
Correct. Yeah.
So if you want to be really compelling in the business channel, you've got to have a big presence on both coasts, right? LA and New York. JetBlue actually was starting to see really positive traction. Once we turned on code share, we turned on corporate discount, we turned on agency programs. We were, I'm not saying it had arrived, but we were certainly making inroads on growing local O&D business, out of both Boston and New York. And, certainly, you can, again, it's another chapter in a book someone's going to write about the network story at American, but it's too bad because that actually had a chance. I'm not saying it would have surpassed United and Delta, what they do in their hubs in New York, but it would have given consumers a really compelling third choice.
Yeah.
And JetBlue is very much loved in New York, right? I mean, and a big presence in Boston, another market I spent a good bit of time in. So it had a chance of actually making a dent, and it would have been really interesting, again, maybe even fascinating to see where that road would have went with JetBlue, frankly.
Well, and those are some of the things where you kind of step back and say, once that, this is back in the, the history of it all, but once Delta Northwest was approved, once Continental and United was approved, once you head down this path, you can say, well, like Zane said, just earlier in this podcast about how the original intent was to have, many airlines and part of deregulation. It's like, yeah, okay, but that didn't happen. So now you got to look at the current environment and say, what's going to add competition? And I think that would have, and again, and might have changed some of the Americans' fortunes and all this. It's like interesting. We were talking about it's actually a lot of factors that came together that culminated in last week, right? This isn't like, it wasn't just about NDC. It wasn't just about, it was about a whole host of things. So then it leads to the question of, what does it take? I mean, at this stage, nothing is impossible, but Americans got a pretty huge road ahead in terms of, you said it about, rebuilding trust and kind of restoring, but also like, where do you go? Like, what is the plan? What things could change the fortunes and get American back on a competitive track again?
Yeah, so I think there's some short-term things they can do rather quickly to at least get back on the shelf, right? There's returning content and fares back into the legacy, to the GDSs, EDIFACT, putting those fares and premium fares, I might add, Mike. There's a number of premium fares not in EDIFACT. So, that you can do relatively quickly. You can go ahead and put those back in and get back at least on the shelf for many agencies and corporates. And so that's, to me, is like one of the first immediate steps you can do. And I think the accrual on Advantage and the preferred program and all those things that were spoke about last week. I mean, not having Advantage accrual through select agencies, that going away immediately was brilliant. That is certainly was, I think, in my opinion, maybe the last straw.
Yep.
A lot of backs.
The one
step too far.
On the strategy, just overstepped there. And so turning that back on, getting fares back on, that I think in the short term, right? I think they're still going to have issues. They can turn all the EDIFACT on they want. They're still going to be, where are you at that? They're going to look at every single corporation they have a program with, or every single corporation they, remember they went through all this contract and discount rationalization that was going on during all this time too. So they're going to look at each customer, find out, what's worth fighting for, what's it going to take to kind of get more relevant again. And they're going to have to do the same thing with the TMCs, the agencies, because there's but the relationship thing, and again, I'm not trying to create more drama here than already exists, but that is going to take time. That is going to take a big investment. And I am not sure how they're going to do that, because the infrastructure, the systems, the people, the support center, the waivers, the whole, everything's gone.
Yeah.
It's not like you can just flip a switch right now and get right back into the channel.
Yeah.
So I think, if I was there, I would be saying, let's get out to talk to our biggest customers. Let's get back out talking to our biggest agencies. Let's go put in plans and see where we can kind of shore up short term so we can make second and third quarter, a going concern. And then longer term, what's the target? What do we want to be doing? What can we achieve working with our partners that can ultimately advance NDC? Because, there is a lot of good that NDC created. You guys touched on a lot of it.
Yep.
The shopping experience, bringing the direct channel into the third parties is a really good thing for everybody. I'm not selling it. I'm just telling you, I think it's a really good outcome.
Yeah.
How you do it and how you go about it, that's the key. And it's going to be a fascinating next 2 or 3 weeks to see how this kind of rolls out, how much American will talk about publicly, and then how much will actually be taking place behind the scenes that, maybe we can talk about again at some point.
Yeah. Well, like I said, hard road ahead, but nothing is impossible. I mean,
Yeah.
the comparison I think of, those of you like us who've been around the industry, I go back to, probably the closest thing I can think of was really like Don Valentine back at Continental, right before the whole team of Gordon Bethune with Bonnie Wrights and Dave Hilfman and everybody came, and Monisa Klein, everybody, like they all came in and did a whole transformation about how they approached the market. He was trying to take Continental and make them another Southwest, and he was
Right.
same thing, stripped them down, was removing all the agency agreements, doing it was kind of similar. There was a similar tone to it, and it didn't work, and he got unceremoniously,
Exactly.
moved out. And then with the team that came in and kind of said, okay, like we're gonna try a little harder on service. We're gonna incent everybody to have a stake in this. We're gonna come up with a new game plan, and they did it, and it worked, and it was like, and one that got written about. And so you say, like, nothing is impossible.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I didn't mention also, Mike, just briefly, is there is a very good, capable team at American. It's a different
Yeah.
team. I'm not
Yeah.
minimizing change management through all this, right? Most
Yep.
customers have a different account manager. Most agencies are working with a different account manager. So there was a lot of change, but there's good people there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
can they reset? Can they execute? Yes, I think they can. How long does it take? That's the
Well,
question.
but they're going to have to, it's that trust element of coming back and reestablishing it and showing the consistency what you said, true. You got to, what's the long game of kind of now, like you got to do it, but you're going to have to, it's going to take time. It's going to
Yep.
take, it will not be overnight. And it'll be interesting to see, because there's going to be, continued now, like an even increasing amount of shareholder pressure. So it's
Well,
not going to be,
the
it's going to be tough.
stock hasn't moved from last week. So, and I'm not sure why I didn't sell my stock when I left American, but
You're still a loyalist. well, Jim, again,
don't come to
thanks.
me for stock advice anyway.
Well, you can work on my swing for me though.
Well,
Well, we asked this question of everyone. I'll ask it of you as kind of a closer. When we look ahead in the the future, we always talk about what's changing, and I'll ask you the same thing. What do you think that won't change about our industry in the next year or two?
I like Zane's comment about the seat size. I guess he's in the wrong cabin. I would say, and you're going to call me old school, but I can say old school to you, Mike, because you're from the same class. But
Yeah.
relationships matter. I don't think
Yeah.
that is going to change. This channel is dependent on relationships.
Yeah.
I don't care what anybody says. You can have a direct to consumer strategy. That's probably less about relationships. But this channel, managed corporate travel, agency, third party, et cetera, requires relationships. So I think relationships will become a bigger piece of this ecosystem we've been a part of for decades. And I think relationships ultimately matter and will make a difference.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. Well, Jim, thanks for stopping by. Appreciate it. Appreciate your insight. I think it's really important to keep, your perspective is really valuable as we kind of think about as an industry how to move forward with all this. So I appreciate you coming on.
All
It
right.
was
Thanks.
great to be here. Thanks.
Thanks,
All right.
Jim. Jim Carter is Managing Director, Eastern and Central Sales Divisions at American Airlines. Jim, thanks again for coming on the show.
Appreciate it, Jim.
All right, Mike. And we will wrap today with headwinds and tailwinds, where we
Yes.
identify what we think is adding value to travel or taking it away. Today, Mike, you're on headwinds.
Yeah. So my headwind is not to add injury to insult, kind of the old expression, but in the announcement came out that the flight attendant union for American, they're in contract negotiations, and they basically told their members to get ready for the potential of a strike. And so look, strikes are terrible for the airline industry, not just for those involved. If it gets to that, I know it's negotiations. So that's all part of the process. And Sarah Nelson over at the Flight Attendants Union is, she's terrific and a really good representative of her sector of the industry. And I can't say enough in terms of what flight attendants have to endure, deal with, the role they play, the importance of it, how critical they are to the health and safety of everybody, stepping on an airplane. So that goes without saying. There's always, appropriate kind of balance between that and then economics and what everyone can afford. So again, hopefully it gets resolved without, getting to that point, because strikes are terrible, not just again for those involved, but just for the industry in whole. It's just not good and certainly not needed. But again, we'll keep an eye on it. Hopefully, all will get resolved, and we'll move forward. Last thing America needs right now is another problem and another challenge for their well-being as well. So we'll see where it all comes out.
Okay. Thanks for that, Mike. I'm on tailwinds today, and I know we talked about a lot of challenges and chaos in the travel industry, but I'm going to end on a high note. Record was set for TSA airport screenings. The record was broken just ahead of the Memorial Day weekend. The number of airline travelers screened at U.S. airports reported by the TSA, more than 2.9 million travelers were screened. Congrats to the TSA for managing that huge swing, and just shows that the travel industry remains strong, that people want to travel and are traveling. And I think we're going to have, an incredible summer ahead of us. So chaos and challenges within the business of travel, but people keep on trucking and keep on traveling. Yep. And so that's good news for everyone.
And just a little a plug on travel again. So first off, I mean, we predicted all this in terms of the outcome back when we did the project during the pandemic and said we would get here, and here we are. So I think we had a good, and with all of our advisors and all the work we did, I think we had it right. The other thing I want to say, I did an op-ed called A Canary in Coal Mine a year ago, and I just did an updated version of it. We just put it up on LinkedIn, just some updated commentary. If you take a look at it, and if for anybody you want a little perspective about the industry in whole, I think maybe gives you a little bit of insight. It's a quick read, but I think useful. So give it a look. Go to Travel Again, you'll find it.
Okay, Mike, thanks for that. That is our show. Thanks again to our sponsors, BLS and Omni Hotels and Resorts. And we look forward to seeing you back here again next week. Thanks, Mike.
Great to see you, Ed. Good fun.